Hello everyone and welcome to Brain Blitz Audios. Today, in this particular episode of CAT Curriculum, we'll be looking at some previous year questions of the Common Admissions Test. Today, we'll be looking at questions from the section of the CAT exam titled Data Interpretation and Logical Reasoning, or DILR. So, let's jump to our first question for today. Now, as with most of the questions from the section of DILR, this question also has a set of information given to it, and then there are 4 sub-questions that follow. So let's read the directions first and then the questions before we move on to solving them. Applicants for the doctoral programs of UMBI Institute of Engineering, AIE, and Bambi Institute of Engineering, BIE, have to appear for a Common Entrance Test, or CET. The test has 3 sections: Physics, represented as P, Chemistry, represented as C, and Math, represented as M. Among those appearing for CET, those at or above the 80th percentile in at least 2 sections and at or above the 90th percentile overall are selected for the Advanced Entrance Test, or AET, conducted by AIE. The AET is used by AIE for the final selection of candidates. For the 200 candidates who are at or above the 90th percentile overall based on CET, the following are known about their performance in CET. Statement number 1, no one is below the 80th percentile in all 3 sections. Number 2, 150 are at or above the 80th percentile in exactly 2 sections. The number 150 represents candidates. Number 3, the number of candidates at or above the 80th percentile only in P, that is physics, is the same as the number of candidates at or above the 80th percentile only in C, that is chemistry. The same is the number of candidates at or above the 80th percentile only in M, which is math. And finally, statement number 4 says the number of candidates below 80th percentile in P proportionate to the number of candidates below 80th percentile in C, proportional to the number of candidates below 80th percentile in M, is equal to 4:2:1. Now, the second institute, that is Bambi Institute of Engineering, or BIE, uses a different process for selection. If any candidate is appearing in the AET conducted by the AIE, BIE considers their AET score for final selection, provided that the candidate has scored 80 percentile or more in P, or physics. Any other candidate at or above the 80 percentile in physics in CET, but who is not eligible for the AET, is required to appear in a separate test to be conducted by BIE to be considered for final selection. Altogether, there are 400 candidates this year who have scored 80 percentile or more in P. Now, this particular question has 4 sub-questions. Let's first read the questions before moving on to how to solve them. So, question number 1 says, what best can be concluded about the number of candidates sitting for the separate test for BIE who were at or above the 90th percentile overall in CET? Options are 3 or 10, 10, 5, 7 or 10. Now when we move on to the second question, it says if the number of candidates who are at or above the 90th percentile overall and also at or above the 80th percentile in all three sections in CET is actually a multiple of 5, what is the number of candidates who are at or above 90th percentile overall and at or above the 80th percentile in both P and M in CET? Question number 3 goes like this. If the number of candidates who have scored 90 percentile or more overall, and also those who have scored 80 percentile or more in all three sections in CET is actually a multiple of 5, then how many candidates were shortlisted for the AET for AIE? And your final question would go like this. If the number of candidates who scored 90 percentile or more overall, and also those who score 80 percentile or more in P in CET is more than 100, then how many candidates had to sit for the separate test for BIE? Your options are 299, 310, 321, 330. So, now that we've looked at all of these questions, you might be wondering, how do we solve this question? Since you have a lot of information thrown at you, it is best if you can organize it and then start solving each question. So in order to solve this particular question, you would need the help of a Venn diagram. Now this particular Venn diagram would represent the people who scored above or equal to 90 percentile overall. Now, when we talk about overall in the context of the test, that means all of their marks put together is more, the number of marks they scored in all three subjects put together is more than 90 percentile. So we're going to consider this particular circle to be physics, represented as P. This section would be chemistry, represented by C, and the circle below to be mathematics, represented by M. Now we'll consider this section here to be A, this sector. This would be B, this would be C. Now, this particular area where P and C intersect is D. Similarly, where P and M intersect would be represented as E. This area would be represented as F, and the central area where all three of these circles overlap each other would be represented by the letter G. Now, we will also represent the space inside the rectangle, which are not occupied by any of the circles, as H. And we also know from the question that there are 200 candidates within this Venn diagram, or basically 200 candidates who scored 90 percentile and above. Now, let's look at the statements. Statement 1 says no one in the 200 candidates is below the 80th percentile in all three sections. So among the 200 candidates, the condition is that they should score at least greater than or equal to the 80th percentile in one subject. So whether it's physics, chemistry, or math, they need to score in at least one of these subjects a score which is greater than or equal to the 80th percentile. Now, what does that mean? Now, it means that the value outside, which is H, this here represents all the candidates who haven't scored 80th percentile or above in any of the subjects. So that means that the value of H is equal to 0. Now, does that help? Yes, it means that the sum of all of the parts of the circle that we have labeled will be equal to 200. So from statement 1, we know that H equals 0, which means A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F would be, plus G, of course, would be equal to 200, which is the total pool of candidates. Now, let's look at statement 2. 150 number of candidates are at or above the 80th percentile in exactly 2 sections. Now, the term exactly 2 sections would mean that we have 3 cases. Those have scored above 80th percentile in physics and chemistry, those have scored above the 80th percentile in physics and math, and those have scored above 80th percentile in chemistry and math. Now let's go back to our Venn diagram. If you can see, G here represents all 3 subjects because all 3 circles overlap at that particular area. However, if you look at the sections D, E, and F, D represents the overlap between physics and chemistry, but does not include people who've scored more than 80 in mathematics, so it does not include G. Similarly, E represents people who've scored 80th percentile or more in physics and math, and F represents the same for chemistry and math. Again, not the area of G is not considered because, of course, that would be an overlap of physics or overlap of the 3rd subject, which would make the condition null. So D, E, and F are the situations that represent exactly 2 sections. So from statement number 2, it says that there are 150 candidates who scored 80th percentile or more in exactly 2 sections. So that means the sum of D, E, and F will be equal to 150. Now, let's go to statement number 3. The number of candidates at or above the 80th percentile only in physics, which is P, is the same as the number of candidates at or above the 80th percentile only in C, and which is also true for M. So what does that mean? That means candidates who scored above the 80th percentile in only P is equal to the number of candidates who scored the same in only chemistry, which is also equal to the number of candidates who did the same only in math. So if we look at it, A, B, and C represent exactly 1 section. So according to statement 3, the number of people who have scored 80th percentile and above in exactly 1 subject is equal across the 3 subjects, which means A equals B equals C. Now from here, of course, you can probably work on this particular equation. Now, if you look at from statement 1, we have an equation A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus F plus G equals 200. Now this can be rewritten as A plus A plus A, since A, B, and C are equal, plus DEF is given as 150, plus G equals 200. Therefore, 3A plus G would be equal to 200 minus 150, which means 3A plus G equals 50 candidates. Now, of course, you can also write it as G equals 50 minus 3A. This relation would turn out to be extremely important later on in solving the question. So let's move on to the 4th statement. Now this shows a proportion. Number of candidates below 80th percentile in P. Now let's define that. Okay, so the entire circle that belongs to P represents the number of students who have scored above or equal to the 80th percentile in physics. Now that means they represent A plus D plus G plus E. Now, the other students in this pool, that is B, students belonging to B, F, and C, are those who did not get above or equal to 80th percentile. So 80th percentile in P would be represented by B plus C plus F. Similarly, for chemistry, the 80th percentile, the people below 80th percentile would be represented as by A, E, and C. So A plus E plus C would give you the number of candidates below 80th percentile in chemistry. Now, the same criteria for math, if you take the circle of math outside, you would see A, D, and B are the candidates, the sections of candidates who scored below 80th percentile in math. So it would be A plus B plus D. Now, the ratio of all of these is 4:2:1. So let's write that. From statement 4, let's just box this area out. From statement 4, what we get is B plus C plus F is to A plus E plus C is to A plus B plus D. Now that would be proportionate to 4:2:1. Now we can rewrite the three quantities on the left in terms of A, because A equals B equals C from statement 3. So therefore what we get is 2A plus F is to 2A plus E is to 2A plus D, proportionate to 4:2:1. Now that means if you were to add these three quantities together, so since this is a proportionate scale, we can consider 2A plus F as equal to 4 of, say, X, and 2A plus E as 2 of X, and 2A plus D as 1 of X. Now, X is some proportionality constant. Now, what that gives you is 2A times 3 gives you 6A, plus D plus E plus F as equal to 4 plus 2 plus 1, which is 7 times X. Now, we know that D plus E plus F, according to statement 2, is 150. So therefore, 6A plus 150 is equal to 7X. So from this particular equation, we know that 6A plus 150 is a multiple of 7. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to have to use trial and error. Now, in order to simplify our work, let's go to question 1. So question 1's options are 3 or 10, 10, 5, 7 or 10. So we know that we only need to really check for 4 values, which is 3, 5, 7, and 10. So with that in mind, let's go back to the Venn diagram and apply it. So basically what we're going to do is put values of A into the equation and then find out the value of X. So when A equals 0, 6A becomes 0, so 7X equals 150, but that is not true because 150 is not a multiple of 7. Similarly, if you go for A equals 1, it would be 6 times 1, 6, plus 150, which would be 156. Again, just try dividing it by 7 and you would notice it would not be a clean division. So 156 is not a multiple of 7. Similarly, for A equals 2, 162, again, is not a multiple of 7. Now, if you are confused, 7 times 20 is 140. You can just work on from there. 21 sevens are 147, 22 sevens are 154, 23 sevens are 161, and so on. Now, if you take a equals 3, then 6 times 3 is 18, plus 150 gives you 168. 24 times 7 would also be 168. So that is equal to 7x, which means we would get the value of x as 24. So we don't have to do it for every number. We can just skip ahead to the numbers that we talked about, which are 3, 5, 7, and 10. Now for a equals 5, 6 times 5 is 30. 30 plus 150 gives you 180, not a multiple of 7. A equals 7. So 6 times 7 is 42. That means you would get 192, which is again not a multiple of 7. However, if you go for a equals 10, then you would get 60 plus 150. That gives you 210, which is actually a multiple of 7, where x would be equal to 30. Now, the list actually goes on and on. However, if you look at this particular equation here, 3a plus g has to be equal to 50, right? Now, suppose the value of a goes above 50. I mean, suppose this left-hand side goes above 50, then the value of a would not work for this particular scenario. So a has to be less than 17. So anything that is equal to or above 17 becomes the value of a. It nullifies the second condition of 3a plus g being equal to 50, because the reason being the value of 3a itself would exceed 50. And to prove that, let's do 17 times 3. 7 threes are 21, 1 threes are 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, so 51. So therefore, basically we're looking at numbers from 0 to 16, and we do trial and error amongst that. And in order to be smart, you can just look at the options for question 1, which are basically 3, 5, 7, and 10. So from here, we notice that a has to be equal to 3 or 10. So a has to be equal to 3 or 10 turns out to be the right option for question 1. So basically, what this question's meaning is to find the value of A. Now, A, B, and C are those candidates who got 90th percentile overall, but only got 80th percentile or above in one subject. And they are eligible for the BIE test, for the separate test for BIE. So basically, it only applies to B and C, since A represents people who've got 80th percentile and above in physics. So the values of B and C are equal to A. So it's 3. We can either take it as 3 persons each for B and C, or 10 people each for B and C. So that is why option A turns out to be the right option. Option B would be incorrect, because it would disapprove of the 3 or 10 duality. Option C, 5, again, did not work. We checked it out, and 5 is not a multi, and the 6a plus 150 for a equals 5 is not a multiple of 7. Again, for option D, if it's 7 or 10, again, for 7, it wasn't a multiple of 7. So therefore, option D would be incorrect. The right option is option A, 3 or 10. Now, before we move on to the next question, we know that A is 3 or 10. So let's just work on the two conditions. So for that, let me just erase this. So we know that there are two cases, A is 3 or A is 10. Now suppose for A equals 3, the value of D would be equal to x minus 2a. Again, all of this can be brought out from here because we know that 2a plus d is equal to 1x. So we're just rearranging that equation. X in that case would be 24 minus 2 times 3. So therefore, the value of d is 18. Similarly, for E, the value would be equal to 2x minus 2a. So basically, 2 times 24 minus 3, which is 2 times of 21, which is equal to 42. And for F, it will be equal to 4x minus 2a. So that would also be 2 times 48 minus a, which would be 3. So 2 times 45, which is equal to 90. So F is 90, E is 42, and D is 18. This would also mean that G will be equal to 50 minus 9. 9 is 3 times 3. Therefore, the value of G would be equal to 41. This is scenario number 1. The second scenario is when A equals to 10. So again, D equals to 30 minus 2 times of 10, which would be equal to 10. E is equal to 2x, which would be 60, minus 2a, which is 20. So E would be equal to 40. F would be equal to 4x, that is 120, minus 2a, which is 20. Therefore, F would be equal to 100, and G will be equal to 50 minus 3 times of 10, which is equal to 20. So we have two separate cases. When A equals to 3, then we have D equals 18, E equals 42, F equals 90, G equals 41. When A is equal to 10, we get D equals 10, E equals 40, F equals 100, G equals 20. Now, why did we write that for question 2? Because it directly relates with the answer that we need to be looking for question 2. Now, what does question 2 say? If the number of candidates who are at or above the 90th percentile overall and also at or above the 80th percentile in all 3 sections in CET is actually a multiple of 5. Now, what does that mean? That first half of the question means that the sum of D, E, F, and G, if you look at it, now there's been a slight error in the explanation. Let me explain that again. The question reads, if the number of candidates who are at or above the 90th percentile overall and also at or above the 80th percentile in all 3 sections in CET is actually a multiple of 5. Now that long sentence means that the value of G should be a multiple of 5. Now why G? Let's go back to the question and see. If you look at it, the statement said 80 percentile in all of the subjects and 90 percentile overall. Now if you look at that, all 3 circles overlap at G. So therefore the value of G has to be a multiple of 5 for question 2. So we have two values of G. One value is G equals 41. The other value is G equals 20. Now 20 is a multiple of 5. So we take A equals to 10 and G equals to 20 as the case here. Okay? We need to find out the number of candidates who are at or above 90 percentile overall and at or above the 80 percentile in both P and M. Okay? So 90 percentile overall and 80 percentile in both P and M. Now we will find the corresponding letters. Okay, so in this particular question, they never said, the question did not say the word exactly. Now if exactly, the word exactly was present, that would mean that we only need to find the number of people who scored 80 percentile or above in P and M. However, this question doesn't use the word exactly. So that means we can also include people who got 80 percentile and above in all 3 subjects, and we add to that the number of people who got 80 percentile and above in just physics and math. So by understanding that, let's go back to the Venn diagram. So this is physics, the circle on the bottom is math. So this particular area here is what we are considering for question 2. Now, as you can see, it is basically adding E and G. So now that we understand that, we know that it's basically the addition of E and G. So basically, we just need to add the quantities equal to E and G. We know that E is equal to A, so therefore it will be A plus G. We know that the case here is A equals 20, A equals 10 and G equals 20, so therefore it would be 20 plus 10, which would be equal to, again, make sure that since there's a lot of values, to not create problems for yourself. So E is not equal to A. That is the wrong hypothesis, because according to statement 3, A equals B equals C. Okay, so we know that the value of G is 20. Now for G equals 20 and A equals 10, we know that the value of E, this is what we've solved, is equal to 40. So the value of E is 40, the value of G is 20. When you add them up, the total number of candidates would be 60. So people who scored 80 percentile or above in both physics and math, and who are above 90 percentile overall in the CET, would be 60 candidates. Let's move on to question 3. Now, if you've noticed, while we were reading the questions, we noticed that the first half of both questions 2 and 3 are similar. Because over here also, we can read if the number of candidates who are at or above the 90th percentile overall and also at or above the 80th percentile in all three sections in CET is actually a multiple of 5. Now again, that means we're using the condition A equals 10, D equals 10, E equals 40, F equals 100, G equals 20. Now the next half of the question says, what is the number of candidates who are at or above 90 percentile overall? Again, this is basically the same question. Let's move on to the third question. Again, as I've illustrated before, the first half is similar. If the number of candidates who have scored 90 percentile or more overall and those who have scored 80 percentile or more in all three sections in CET is actually a multiple of 5. That means A equals 10, D equals 10, E equals 40, F equals 100, G equals 20. We need to find out how many candidates were shortlisted for the AET for AIE. So how do we understand that? Let's go back and read the information in order to be more clear. So at the end of the first paragraph, so let's read the first paragraph from scratch. Applicants for the doctoral programs of AIE and BIE have to appear for a common entrance test. It has 3 sections, physics, chemistry, and math. Among those appearing for CET, those at or above the 80th percentile in at least 2 sections and at or above the 90th percentile overall are selected for the Advanced Entrance Test or AET. So the critical term here is at least 2 sections. Now what does that mean? That means people who scored 80 percentile and above in physics and chemistry, physics and math, chemistry and math, or all 3 sections are eligible for the Advanced Entrance Test. Now what does that mean for the Venn diagram? So for the Venn diagram, people who have scored more than 80 percentile in at least 2 sections would mean that these sections that are D, E, F, and G, so all the intersections, so all the places where the circles intersect, these people are qualified for the AET. That means they can now go on and attempt the Advanced Entrance Test. So basically, D, E, F, G are candidates eligible for the Advanced Entrance Test. So basically, the number of candidates would be D plus E plus F plus G. Now, which value of D, E, F, and G should we take? That is what the first half of the question defined for us. We need to take the case where A is 10 and G is 20. So that would mean the value of D would be 10, the value of E is 40, the value of F is 100, and the value of G is 20. So 10 plus 40 gives you 50, 50 plus 20 gives you 70, 70 plus 100 gives you 170 candidates. So 170 candidates is the right answer for question number 3. Now this is question number 4. If the number of candidates who score 90 percentile or more overall, and also those who score 80 percentile or more in CET is more than 100, find out how many candidates had to sit for the separate test for BIE. So again, we need we have two cases, so we need to find out which case are we looking for here, because that's what the first half of the question determines. So what they say is they need people who are greater than or equal to 80 percentile. Their score is greater than or equal to 80 percentile in physics and greater than or equal to 90 percentile overall. This value has to be greater than 100 candidates. Now, what determines this particular value? For that, let's go back to the Venn diagram. Now, if you look at the Venn diagram, the entire circle of P represents the number of people who scored 80th percentile or above in physics and who are also scorers of 90 percentile or above overall in the common entrance test. Now that means this entire circle for physics is what represents the condition for our question. That has to be greater than 100. So therefore, what that means is we need to add A, D, E, and G. So now that we know what quantities we should take, let's go back to the question. So this particular condition needs to be determined by computing A, D, E, and G. Now, if A equals 3, then D equals 18, E equals 42, G equals 41. And the second case is if A equals 10, then D equals 10, E equals 40, G equals 20. So A plus D plus E plus G for the second case would be 10 plus 10, that is 20, plus 40 would be 60, plus 20 would be 80. So for the second case where A equals 10, the value of candidates who scored more than 80 percentile in physics in the common entrance test would be equal to 80. However, that does not satisfy our question because it says more than 100. So we know that it's the first case that we need to take. However, let's still calculate the amount of people. So A plus D plus E plus G would be like this. It'll be 42 plus 41 plus 18 plus 3. 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 8 is 14. And 4 plus 1 is 5, 5 plus 4 is 9, 9 plus 1 is 10. So 104, this of course is greater than 100, and therefore it solidifies the idea that we should take the first case where A equals 3. Okay, so we will take that case, and we need to find out the number of people who have to sit for the separate test. So what's the condition for people who have to sit for the test by BIE? We need to go back to the information given to us and understand how it's done. So this basically is elucidated in the last paragraph. BIE uses a different process. If any candidate is appearing in the AET, BIE considers their AET score for final selection, provided the candidate has scored 80 percentile or more in physics. Any other candidate at or above the 80th percentile in physics in CET who is not eligible for the AET is required to appear in a separate test. And we're also given that there are 400 candidates this year who have scored 80 percentile or more in physics. Okay? So instead of moving this way, let's go back to the information and go to question 4. So what do we know? We know that the total people who've scored more than 80 percentile or equal to it in physics is 400. We also know that people who have qualified for the AET do not need to take the BIE test provided they scored more than 80 percentile in physics. Okay, so let's go back to the Venn diagram and see for ourselves. So this shaded area here represents the people who are eligible for the AET test. Now, if you look at the 4 sections, you can see that section F here, this is the section of students who scored more than 80 percentile or equal to it in both chemistry and math. Now, this means they would have scored less than 80 percentile in physics. So that means the sections D, E, and G are the students who have scored more than 80 percentile in physics and who have qualified for the advanced entrance test. So these people do not need to take the test again. So therefore, we would write D plus E plus G are the people who have qualified for AET. That means they don't need to write the BIE test. Okay? Now that means the people who have to sit for the BIE test would be 400, which is the total amount of people who scored greater than 80 percentile in physics, minus the sum of D, E, and G. Now, we know that the value of D is 10. We know that the value of D is not 10. The value of D is, since we're taking the first case, we would need to check the values for that case. So we're taking the case where A is 3, so that means D is 18, E is 42, and G is 41. All right, so 42 plus 41 plus 18, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 8 is 11, 4 plus 1 is 5, 5 plus 4 is 9, 9 plus 1 is 10. So therefore, it will be 400 minus 101 students. So therefore, the number of students who would need to take the BIE test would be 299. So 299 candidates would need to take the separate test for BIE. That means option A turns out to be the right option. The other answers are incorrect because they do not fulfill our conditions. So some of these values, such as 321 and 330, would have only been possible if the value of A, D, E, and G combined would be equal to 80, which again is not correct because the question specified that that particular value has to be greater than 100. So A, D, E, G had to be greater than 100. So therefore, we took the value where that value is 104. And from there, we got the value of the number of people who have to sit for the separate test as 299. So I hope we found this episode informative. Again, these questions are, of course, difficult, and therefore you would need to practice a lot of them in order to get the basics and also how to solve them effectively in mind. So having said that, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you want to get more questions for the CAT exam. or for any of the other tests that you would like. So until the next webisode, take care, stay safe, ta-ta for now.